Chapter 22. Clever Queen is Born into the Kingdom. The meetings continued all the next day, and every minute was filled with stories and songs of glad tidings. The growth of the work in each outstation was studied, and great was the rejoicing. But it was the Friday night meetings that seemed to be the most important one of all, as it was the beginning of the Sabbath. Everybody was dressed in his best clothes, and the band played only hymns. But oh, such music! As the crowd gathered into the building and the boys and girls took their places on the platform, they all joined in the opening hymn. What a wonderful change in my life has been wrought since Jesus came into my heart. I have light in my soul for which long I have sought since Jesus came into my heart. I shall go there to dwell in that city I know, since Jesus came into my heart. And I'm happy, so happy, as onward I go, since Jesus came into my heart. The outstations had been practicing the song during the year, so most of the visitors could sing it. As they sat down, Clever Queen's eyes rested on her grandma and a village girl sitting beside her. The words of the song were still ringing in her ears. Grandma's face was still shining with delight, but the face of the little village girl beside her was sadly thoughtful. She sat there looking at the rows of clean children sitting on the platform. Then she tried to snuggle up to Clever Queen's grandma as if she were trying to hide herself. Nervously, she tried to tuck as much of her dress out of sight as she could. Clever Queen wondered at this strange behavior, but soon her eyes were opened, and she knew the reason why. This was the change which they had been singing about. If she had not come to school, this is just the way she would have looked. Her dress all dirty, hair carelessly combed, mouth red with betel nut, and teeth all blackened with tobacco. There had been a wonderful change indeed. But as she pondered a moment, she realized it was not all in the clothes or the hair. The little dirty village girl was still a slave of the devil's and lived in constant fear and dread. But floods of joy overflowed Clever Queen's soul like sea billows that rolled, because Jesus had come into her heart. Yes, Jesus had come into Clever Queen's heart. But Thar was talking. "If ye love me, keep my commandments," he read. Clever Queen's thoughts turned suddenly from feeling good about the change that had come into her life, and she paid good attention to what Thar said, because keeping the commandments, that was the very thing that troubled her. So many people think they dare not become Christians because they cannot keep all of the commandments. He was saying, "But fathers and mothers, I want you to remember that when the lawyer asked Jesus which was the greatest commandment, he gave an answer that fits you and me and all of us. He said, 'Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself.'" This shows the justice of the living God. Each one must serve him with all his heart and all of his strength. And God requires of those who have much more light than he requires of those who have very little light. Yet it is the one just standard. He demands all of your heart and strength, and all of your heart and strength. Clever Queen's heart was just pounding inside. She nudged Clear Gold to see if she were taking notice. Clear Gold nudged back that she was, but didn't say a word. She couldn't, for Thar kept right on talking. "The other day," he said, "I was visiting in Thar Mayat Po's house, and it happens to be at dinner time. And Thar Mayat Po sat on the floor with his little boy Solomon right beside him, eating from their little table. And that father loved that little boy more than anything else in all the world. Little Solomon loved his daddy, too, and as he sat there, he snuggled up close and tried to do just what his daddy was doing. "Solomon," said his daddy, "how much do you love me?" And little 3-year-old Solomon, who couldn't speak very much, but who understood clearly everything, stretched his chubby little arms out as far as he could get them, and said in his little baby talk, "This big." "Well, then," said his daddy, "if you love me, jump up and get me a drink of water." The words were hardly finished when up jumped the little fellow, and he just ran for all he was worth over to the water pot. But the water pot was too high, and he couldn't reach it. Then he looked up at the tin cup on the post beside it, and it was too high, too. He couldn't reach that, and for a minute he stood there not knowing just what he ought to do. Then he stood on his very tiptoes and stretched up his little hand as far as he could, and with his little stomach pressed flat against the post, he could just touch the bottom of that tin cup. But he did all that he could, and as he tinkled the bottom of the tin cup against the post with his tiny little fingers, he called out with all of his strength, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, I can't reach it." When his father, who was looking proudly on, heard the cry of his little boy, who was doing all he could for all he was worth, his heart was touched, and he went over and lifted the little fellow up in his arms. He lifted him high till his little hands could grasp the cup and dip the water. Then he put little Solomon on the floor, and though by the time he got to the table the water was half spilled, I saw that Father drank that water, and I heard him say, "It's the sweetest cup of water I've ever tasted in all of my life." Clever Queen listened breathlessly. "That was just for me," she breathed to herself. "That was just for me." And all through the rest of the meeting, she felt a new comfort and a new strength coming into her heart. "With all of my little strength and all of my little heart, yes, I can do that for Jesus, and I will." There followed a few pictures telling the story of Jesus, and as the scenes of Jesus on the cross were shown, a quartet sang, "When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride. Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were a tribute far too small, love so amazing, so divine, demands my life, my soul, my all." There was a hush through the great audience, broken only by a sob here and there. The lights came on, but no one was ashamed to be seen using a handkerchief. Thar asked those who had determined that night to serve God and to keep His commandments, to show their love for Him, to stand. There was but the briefest moment of hesitation, and Clever Queen and Clear Gold stood hand in hand. Their heads were bowed, their little breasts rose and fell in quiet sobs. But they did not stand alone. About 60 stood with them that night and accepted the Lord Jesus as their Lord and Master. 16 were thought, after careful questioning, to be ready for baptism. But the smaller ones, including Clever Queen, were organized into a baptismal class where they could study together all the steps for baptism. Another happy 2 years passed, and at the last camp meeting I attended in Burma just a few months before I came back to America, Clever Queen and Clear Gold were baptized. It was such a happy day. Grandma was there, and Clever Queen's mother was there. Hundreds of people from the nearby villages were there to see how the God worshippers baptized. But the old toothless grandma wasn't there. No, indeed, she said. I do not go to see the Dakatars eat up Clever Queen. Indeed, I won't. But Clever Queen knew that there was no Dakatar to eat her up, and she knew that her eyes had been opened and that she had turned from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to the living God, and she was supremely happy. This is the end of the story of Clever Queen.